Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Goodbye Stars podcast. This is a sad one on my commute for your commute. The Dallas Stars have been eliminated in 5 games by the Edmonton Oilers in the Western Conference Finals again. This was a game that I didn't watch a whole lot of. I watched regrettably the first about 7 minutes, I want to say, and then after goal two went in, I turned it off promptly and decided that I was going to enjoy my night, actually, for once. Um, and while we did have shades of a comeback, kind of here and there, Robertson scores twice. The lead was at one point 2-3, and then at one point 4-3. Um, it was just too much for us to overcome. Edmonton just was the better team tonight, I think. I don't think there was anything else to it, really. Or last night, I mean. There wasn't much to it. They were just the better team. They came out better. They came out wanting it more, I think, which was maybe the most important part. They um, capitalized on just about every opportunity that and we paid the price for it. Maverick Bork takes that really bad high sticking penalty to start the game, and I think that kind of just set the tone. Cody Ceci missed his assignment, or blew his assignment, I guess. Moreover, um, leaving Corey Perry wide open in the slot once again for the second game in a row. Andre lets that one in. You can't really blame him there. And then not that long later, 5 minutes later, the Oilers get a clean breakaway off of what looked like, I think it was a late line change. And he just goes 5-hole on Ottinger. And then everyone's probably heard about this, seen about this by now, but the whole Ottinger DeBoer situation kind of goes down where DeBoer calls a timeout. Ottinger comes, and then as he's on his way back to his crease, DeBoer pulls Ottinger in place for Casey DeSmith. About, I think it was at this point 8 minutes into the game, 7 or 8 minutes into the game, after he let in, I think he ended up facing 3 shots, let 2 in, something like that. It was an interesting decision. A lot of people have a lot of different opinions on it. Whether or not it was the right move or whether it was the wrong move. I think a lot of people, the consensus, this morning and today, as I've kind of been reading and kind of gathering people's opinions on it, is the actual move itself wasn't that big of a deal, in the sense of he did let those 2 goals in. Regardless of if they're his faults or not, you gotta get something going for your team. You gotta kind of shock them into scoring and playing. And to DeBoer's credit, it worked to a degree. They scored not long later, um, in the first period, to get back on the board. And you could definitely tell that they were fighting. That it wasn't like it wasn't like the third period of Game 4 where they were just they definitely fought hard. Um, but I think what upset a lot of people was the comments made after the game, the post game conference, where DeBoer kind of threw Ottinger under the bus a little bit. You can go look up the quote. You've probably seen it anywhere if you're scrolling any news site or social media, but it basically went to the effect of Ottinger has lost a lot of games in Edmonton. It's not entirely his fault, but he isn't winning these games, and we needed to change something up. And the way a lot of people took that was he's throwing their all-star, superstar goalie under the bus in an elimination game where the offense was not producing up until that point, basically, at even strength or even on the power play, really. And that upset a lot of people, and, rightfully so. And, there was some footage that came out of, Ottinger and DeBoer kind of not really making eye contact out of the tunnel to start period 2. And I think a lot of people are taking that as, this relationship is completely broken. and not mendable, and DeBoer needs to go, and all this and that. And we'll get to that in a second. But I if I was DeBoer there, I see that the team is fighting. They score that one in the first period. I would have rather him put Andre back in net for the second or even the third period. It's no diss to Casey DeSmith. Everyone I think had confidence in him. Especially leading up to the postseason, where he was a big part of the reason why we went on that kind of improbable 7 or 8 game winning streak, where he had a few really good games. But he's no Andre. You can't really expect him to come in that cold in an elimination game against the Oilers, who have been really good up until that point. So I don't think he can really garner any blame. But I think you definitely put Andre back in after the team kind of woke up in a sense. But we go on, we lose the game. It was a bit of a back and forth. It looked like we had the momentum a few times. After it was 2-3, and then even after when it was 3-4, but we couldn't finish. We couldn't tie the game up, and we fall 6-3 with an empty netter being that sixth goal. And it was an interesting series because yes, we lost in 5 games, and no, I'm not going to be like the Hurricanes and say that it looked like it was a sweep, but it wasn't, or it wasn't. Looked like we lost in 5, but it should have been closer. And while I do agree that a couple better play shots, a couple better bounces, behind Skinner, and this is a closer series, I think the Oilers were just flat out the better team. They looked better for more of the time. They looked better at even strength. They looked better on the power play, and I mean, outside of that game one, they really looked better on the penalty kill even too. I think they definitely earned this win. All flowers to Stuart Skinner. He played amazing. I don't know how he does it, how he bounces back so well from bad performances, but he's done it multiple years now. So all credit to him and the rest of this Oilers team. I really thought that they were gonna drop a game or two without Zach Hyman, and they responded really well to that. And I think Chris Knobloch is coming up on a top 5 coach here in the league at this point. Just the adjustments that he's been able to make with this Oilers team, without Ekholm, without now Zach Hyman, because he really was out for most of that game 4. Hyman was, and they creamed us pretty easily in those 2 games without him, basically. And then just, being able to make adjustments up and down the lineups, he's coached really well. So this Oilers team is definitely not one that, looking back, I think, with the results of the games and how everything turned out, not one that we, I don't think it's one that we should be really super bent out of shape about. They were a really good team. They caught form at the right time. I think what makes a lot of people upset is how unclose the games were. Outside of game, outside of game 3, I want to say it was all the games were pretty not super close. You could maybe argue that game 5 and even game 1 maybe were a bit closer, but we were just outcoached, outplayed. And it's not to take away from the Stars team and call them like worse than the Oilers or anything like that, but just the way that we were playing, coming into this series and even throughout it, it was just obvious that we weren't, for whatever reason, in form. Whether or not you want to turn that to a coaching thing or for something else, just lack of players being able to produce in playoffs, whatever it may be. But I think at the end of the day, this was just a rough roll of the dice, not being able to score on 5v5, the penalty kill kind of falling apart there towards the end of the series. Everything just looked kind of discombobulated. Playing from behind in so many games. I think none of the games we had the lead in this series. So it was just not a winning formula. And it's not to say that I don't think this team should have been held to higher standards, but I just don't. I didn't see them being able to take three straight on this Oilers team. They just were too good. Um, Now, as far as where we go from here, as the offseason kind of starts to really take shape, hit the ground, we'll talk about more things, free agents, re-signing and things like that, the draft and whatnot. But I think the big thing that, we can address today, right now, is Pete DeBoer. Is he going to be the coach next year? What are the thoughts on him? And I'll say this, he's completely, I think, lost the fan base. And with just how little, media availability and how little you see guys in the off season, I think he'll probably I think he's probably have lost the fan base for the rest of his tenure now. Barring he goes on a Stanley Cup run or does something else that completely wins the fan base back over, which I don't see unless it's a Stanley Cup. But with that said, I do think that he stays for another year. I think he'll run through his entire contract length, which runs through this upcoming season. And then from there, I think they'll reevaluate, is this a guy who we truly think can take us to that cup, that can truly take us on a cup run? Or is he just going to be a guy who's going to take us deep, going to take us to the Western Conference Finals, but just can't do it, which I think is also a very fair um, evaluation of him right now. Even I definitely see both sides of the argument of firing him or keeping him. But from what the Stars owner is saying right now about how it'd be laughable to fire him, and just based off the fact that three Western Conference Finals isn't exactly the easiest thing to make, especially when you have he has outcoached Jared Bednar the past like 2 or 3 series now. He's proven that he's able to get past the first couple rounds with ease. I mean, it's a tough sell to fire him right now. And then also, I think what plays a big role in it as well is the fact that there isn't a whole lot of great coaching candidates. I know there's a lot of people calling for them to bring up the Texas Stars head coach, Neil Graham, which I don't hate. And if that's what they decide to do, then I would be just as happy, if not maybe a little bit happier than having Pete DeBoer. I've seen a lot of people calling or wanting Steve Ott from the Blues. I don't know a whole lot about him, but from what I've seen with the Blues and just the brief knowledge that I do have about him, I wouldn't hate it. I think one that I've seen a couple people mention, but I think would really be kind of an interesting one, and one that I kind of would I think prefer the most if they do fire him this year or move on from him this year, I suppose, is Jay Woodcroft. I know he wasn't able to get over the hump with the Oilers, but he is, at the end of the day, a good coach and a pretty still kind of fresh coach, as far as head coaching in the NHL goes. So I wouldn't hate that either. But I think those are kind of the three options, unless you go way out of the box, unless you go over to Europe or you go to a really new coach, unless you're talking like a old retread. But I don't think they would probably do that. But I do still think he'll stay, which I don't hate, and we'll talk more about that, in the upcoming days and weeks. But I think this is just something where this next year here, they are really tight on the cap, against the cap wall. They have a few guys that are getting up there in age who are maybe going to take team friendly deals, maybe they're not. So we'll kind of just wait and see what shakes out there. But all in all, this is just kind of, in my opinion, going to be a year where we're going to build chemistry. We're going to see where some of these restricted free agents, Robertson and Harley, how they play, and then kind of go from there. If we make a deep run, we make a deep run, but expectations I don't think should be as high as they have been the past 2 years. I just don't think, unless Jim Nill pulls off some master class, gets Ben on a super cheap deal, gets Duchesne back on what would probably have to be the same deal, and then somehow find a way to get rid of Dumbo without giving up too much. And then there's so much that would have to happen for this team to have the same, or if not more, expectations than last year. I know that probably won't happen, and anything less than a finals appearance for Pete DeBoer will seem like a failure. But I really think that's the case. They just don't have the money right now to, I think, throw at or to fill in the holes that I think are there, like a right hand defenseman or a physical guy in the bottom six. And I have some other thoughts about that as well that we'll get into here as we go on. But that's kind of all I wanted to talk about today, because it's such big news. Everyone's all riled up about it, But at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be something where if we keep DeBoer, Ottinger's going to go there and demand a trade or anything like that. It just doesn't seem like Ottinger's that guy. But we'll see. So that's going to be all for today, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. Keep your heads up. It is just a sports team. I know it sucks, but not the end of the world. There'll be plenty of Stars content to come. And hey, we made it pretty deep this year, so we won't have to wait too long for the regular season to start next year. But hope you guys enjoy your Friday, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.